Good evening from New York. This is Tuesday, October 4th, 399 days until the 2012 presidential election. In a matter of weeks, Occupy Wall Street has grown from a small group of protesters squatting in New York's Zuccotti Park to a national movement. Support from organized labor and progressive groups is increasing by the day, while the protesters, who were once sneered at by most national media and the New York Times, are now part of the testimony on Capitol Hill, part of the conversation on the campaign trail, and part of the calculations on Wall Street. The fifth story on the countdown: Wall Street is not trembling, not yet certainly, though one banker did ask Times columnist Aaron Ross Sorkin if Occupy Wall Street was going to turn into, quote, a personal safety problem. And GOP presidential contender Mitt Romney, the one-time chief of private equity firm Bain Capital, told an audience at a Florida retirement community today, quote, I think it's dangerous, this class warfare. That's a job-killing venture capitalist talking about class warfare as if he didn't practice it every day of his adult life, trying to scare Social Security and Medicare-dependent Americans who don't realize his party would happily cut up their safety net and frame the souvenir pieces and hang them on their walls. Meanwhile, in Washington, Federal Reserve Chair Ben Bernanke testifying before the Joint Economic Committee about the Wall Street excesses that made Occupy Wall Street possible, necessary, with my guest in a few moments, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders.
There are people demonstrating against Wall Street in New York City and other cities around the country, and I think the perception on the part of these demonstrators and millions of other Americans is that as a result of the greed, the recklessness, and the illegal behavior on Wall Street, we were plunged into this horrendous recession we're currently in. Do you agree with that assessment?
It had excessive risk-taking on Wall Street, had a lot to do with it, and so did some failures on the part of regulators.
Texas Republican Congressman Michael Burgess wanted to know more about how Bernanke saw the movement.
What is that protest saying to you? What are you hearing from that activity in New York right now?
People are quite unhappy with the state of the economy and what's happening. They blame, with some justification, the problems in the financial sector for getting us into this mess. And they're dissatisfied with the policy response here in Washington. And at some level, I can't blame them.
As for Occupy Wall Street, it plans to keep clear of any direct political affiliations, tweeting today, we don't want to be the Democratic Tea Party or Liberal Tea Party. We want to be our own movement, separate of any political affiliation. Separate or not, Congressional Progressive Caucus co-chairs, Representatives Keith Ellison of Minnesota and Raul Grijalva of Arizona, today applauded the movement and its calls for corporate accountability and expanded middle-class opportunity. While back in Zuccotti Park, Occupy Wall Street protesters planned a major march for tomorrow with student and labor support. A national student walkout has been planned for tomorrow as a component of Occupy Wall Street, noon, 1 p.m., basically whenever you can do it. And unions, including the Transport Workers Local 100, the 1199 SEIU Healthcare Workers Union, with more than 300,000 members in the Northeast, and National Nurses United, with more than 170,000 workers nationwide, will take part in the march. Protesters Countdown spoke to were thrilled.
I think that's amazing. I think this is ultimately, it's a movement for the workers.
Bringing in these organizations with people from different backgrounds, different class, ethnic, racial backgrounds, gives us all types of new voices, advice, structural support.
Jill Ferrillo of National Nurses United will join me in a few minutes. With plans for Wednesday's march in New York moving forward, protests continue around the country, though some are now having problems with local police. Occupy Chicago has been asked to move its tents and placards off the sidewalk at its location between the Federal Reserve Bank and the Bank of America there. And Occupy Seattle has posted that the mayor asked them to move or face arrest. The protesters say they are not moving. Occupy San Francisco, however, says it will march on the Federal Reserve Building in that city tomorrow. And Occupy Los Angeles plans to collect trash from abandoned, foreclosed homes and deliver it to the doorstep of the banks responsible. And my guest last night, Michael Moore, says there is more to come.
I mean, this is only going to spread, and it's all kinds of people. It's the 99% who've had a boot on their neck by the 1% that occupy these buildings that are surrounding this plaza.
And for more on the extraordinary growth of the Occupy Wall Street movement and its impact on the national debate in Washington, I'm joined as promised by Senator Bernie Sanders, the independent of Vermont. Good evening, Senator.
Good evening, Keith.
You asked Chairman Bernanke about Occupy Wall Street and its connection to the Great Recession today, and Congressman Burgess of Texas did so. What did you think of Bernanke's answers, and were you surprised at that one part of it which he said at some level, I can't blame them?
Yeah, I was, but I think what he said was accurate. I think these demonstrators are touching a nerve, and the nerve is that people all over this country understand that the middle class is collapsing, poverty is increasing, and that this horrendous recession, which has caused so much pain, so many millions of people have lost their jobs, their homes, their life savings, was caused by the greed on Wall Street. And now 3 years later, what kind of punishment have we seen for the crooks that caused this recession? Well, you know what, Keith, they're making more money than they ever made before. So I think what the demonstrators are saying is enough is enough. Wall Street has got to be accountable to the American people. We cannot continue the status quo, and we need some change.
Mitt Romney today called Occupy Wall Street, as I quoted, dangerous and class warfare. On the campaign trail, I guess a little hyperbole is always appropriate, but are you surprised to hear that, given what it seems that 1% has been doing to the 99% for the last 30, 40 years?
I mean, the reality is that, in a sense, Romney is right. Class warfare is being waged in America today. The problem is that the wrong side is winning. I mean, what we have seen in recent years, and actually for the last several decades, is the middle class is disappearing. Got millions more people who are falling into poverty, and yet the people on top are doing phenomenally well. So that in America now you have the most unequal distribution of income and wealth of any major country on earth, with the top 400 wealthiest people owning more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans. And with that wealth, these economic royalists, if you like, which is what FDR called them, exercise enormous political power. And that is, they make incredible campaign contributions. They have lobbyists. They are going to use Citizens United to elect their friends and defeat their enemies. So that is what class warfare is about. A few people on the top exercising enormous power and enormous amounts of money in order to push down the rest of the population.
10 days ago, Occupy Wall Street looked like something that was coming to an end, that had been successful, but a fairly small ripple in the vast ocean of money that the area both represents physically and symbolically. And then something changed. Do you have any idea what's happened, why it has rolled out further, why there are unions involved now, why there's going to be a student walkout tomorrow? What nerve was touched, and how much further can they be touched?
Well, I think what happened, Keith, is people are really, really hurting. I mean, not just economically, they're hurting emotionally. People know that something is wrong, but they're not seeing the manifestation of what they're feeling out there in the public. They're not certainly hearing Congress or the president addressing these issues. And now you see a bunch of people standing out there and saying, hey, you know, Wall Street are the people who caused this problem. We've got to start addressing it. And I think people are saying, yeah, that's right. What we have to do, though, I think, Keith, is not only demonstrate. These guys, the demonstrators, are pointing a finger at the problem. We're going to have to come up with some specific solutions to the problem, among many other things. You got the 6 largest financial institutions in this country who have assets equal to 60% of the GDP of the United States of America, some $7 trillion. Well, what do you do about that reality, that enormous concentration of economic power? I think you got to start breaking these guys up. You have the Fed that provided $16 trillion in low-interest loans to every Wall Street company and many others around the world during the financial collapse. Well, what should the Fed be doing now when real unemployment is 16%? Maybe it has got to respond with equal vigor, equal urgency, and help small businesses with low-interest loans so that they can create the millions of jobs that we need. Maybe we've got to lower the outrageously high interest rates on credit cards that Wall Street is charging us.
Do you think Washington is reacting to this, taking this seriously at this point? Do you have any sense that Occupy Wall Street has made an impact on the political game?
I think that, you know, politicians getting a little bit nervous that maybe the American people are waking up and they want Congress to stand up to the big money interest and protect working families. Yeah, I think that consciousness may be creeping up even on Capitol Hill.
All right. When you see the ones that are still asleep, poke them in the side for us. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, as always, our great pleasure and honor to have you here, sir.
Thank you, Keith.
The National Nurses United Union has announced plans to work with Occupy Wall Street and to take part in tomorrow's big march. And I'm joined now, as also promised, by Jill Ferrillo, registered nurse and the union's bargaining director. Thanks for coming in.
Welcome.
You've been at Zuccotti Park. You've been not just protesting, but also serving in a professional capacity as well. What did you see, and what have you told your fellow nurses?
Well, first of all, what we've seen is amazing in Zuccotti Park. What we've seen is the numbers of people have been growing, and we see the kinds of people that are participating is also becoming diverse and more, the demographics are growing. And so we're seeing that this is a movement that's gaining a lot of momentum. That's what I've seen for the last 2 weeks that I've been at Zuccotti Park. People are angry about the misdeeds of Wall Street, and people are not going to take it anymore. That's the mood in Occupy Wall Street.
So the process by which your association became associated with this movement were what, and to what end?
Okay, well, basically we have had our eyes on Wall Street for many, many months, and we have been acting, mobilizing nurses in this movement against Wall Street. We had a rally in June on Wall Street that had almost 2,000 nurses that came from throughout the country to demand a financial transaction tax be passed so that Wall Street pays us back for the money that they've taken out of our economy. And we also had a demonstration in Washington, D.C. in front of the Chamber of Commerce. We had, in September, over 60 different congressional offices. We had actions involving soup kitchens and mock debates, like, for example, in front of Michelle Bachmann's office. We had a mock debate with her.
Perfect place for it.
It was a great action.
Her absence, I'm sure, did not diminish from the dialogue at all.
Not at all. Not at all. We actually had there was a large puppet representing her that day, and it was great fun. And but also, it pointed out, who she is and who she represents. So. We have been at this for a long time, and we have continued this movement because what we've seen with our patients is that this economic crisis is making our patients sick.
So, in the other way that your patients come into this equation, the people to whom you have been tending at Occupy Wall Street, there have been a few rough moments involving the NYPD. We've just heard, in fact, there's a breaking story at this hour that an unknown group has filed a class action lawsuit against Mayor Bloomberg about the arrests over the weekend, Saturday, at the Brooklyn Bridge, which we'll get into more later in the show as developments occur. But from your sort of professional sense, are you worried about conflict there? Because it seems to be the thing that is attracting the media, and really we have a couple of major instances of some rough moments. But for the most part, has it been somewhat cooperative there?
Well, the demonstrators have made a pledge of nonviolent, nonviolent demonstrations, and everyone has been getting along very well. But the police have been overactive there. All the days that I've been there have been arrests of people. Each day they find some reason to arrest someone. We would have a march to Wall Street, and they would, arrest 2 or 3 people, and it was, then they would release them later. But it just seemed unnecessary. We've had to certainly care for people who have had incidents with pepper spray, for example.
So, give me your estimation here, having seen this, that it's grown to the degree that it's grown. Again, the sort of question I asked Senator Sanders. It seemed to be tailing off 10 days ago. What happened?
I think that the word has gotten out through the different social media networks and through your network and other supportive networks that this is something that's important, that people are joining up, and people are angry at Wall Street, and they want to be able to voice their opinion. People are upset about what's happening with our economic crisis, and specifically how Wall Street needs to pay us back for what they've done. And so this is a growing movement, and it's gained momentum not just in New York now, but in cities throughout the country. We're hearing reports of our nurses in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, throughout the country. In Boston, for example, there was a demonstration of 3,000 people yesterday. So this is gaining momentum. It is not losing.
Indeed. Jill Ferrillo of National Nurses United, great thanks for coming up.
You're welcome.